Yamuna Tira
Yamuna Tira Vanasari
Yamuna Tira
Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Shri Radhe
Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Shri Radhe
Jaya Radha Giridhari Radha Giridhari Shri Radhe
Jaya Radha Giridhari Radha
Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jai Jai Prabhupada.
Jaya Jaya
Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya. Astatara Sata Shri Srimad Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya. Astatara Sata Shri Srimad Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Nitai Gaura Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pasaya Bhutale Srimati Dharamati Samniti Namo Vichari Bhavaya Yes, it's every Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Continuing reading third canto, chapter 29, explanation of devotional service, text 25. Archadav archayetavad Ishwaram mam svakarma krit Yavanna vedas vahridi Sarva bhutesh vavastitam Archadav archayetavad Ishwaram mam svakarma krit Yavanna vedas vahridi Sarva bhutesh vavastitam Achadav achayetavad Ishwaram mam svakarma krit Yavanna vedat svahridi Sarva bhutesh vavastitam Achadav achayetavad Ishwaram mam svakarma krit Yavanna vedas svahridi Sarva bhutesh vavastitam Archadav achayetavad Ishwaram mam svakarma krit Yavanna vedas vahridi Sarva bhutesh vavastitam Archa Ado, beginning with worship of the deity. Archayet, one should worship. Tavat, so long. Ishvaram, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mam, me. Sva, his own. Karma, prescribed duties. Krit, performing. Yavat, as long as. Na, not. Veda, he realizes.
He realizes
Svahridi,
Svahridi,
in his own heart,
in his own heart,
Sarvabhuteshu,
Sarvabhuteshu,
in all living entities,
in all living entities,
avastitam,
Avashtitam,
situated.
situated.
Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. Performing his prescribed duties, one should worship the deity of the Supreme Personality of Godhead until one realizes my presence in his own heart and in the hearts of other living entities as well. Purport. Worship of the deity of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is prescribed herewith even for persons who are simply discharging their prescribed duties. There are prescribed duties for the different social classes of men, the Brahmanas, the Vaishyas, the Kshatriyas and the Shudras, and for the different ashrams, Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyas. One should worship the deity of the Lord until one appreciates the presence of the Lord in every living entity. In other words, one should not be satisfied simply by discharging his duties properly. He must realize his relationship and the relationship of all other living entities with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If he does not understand this, then even though he discharges his prescribed duties properly, it is to be understood that he is simply laboring without profit. The word svakarma krit in this verse is very significant. Svakarma krit is one who engages in discharging his prescribed duties. It is not that one who has become a devotee of the Lord or who engages in devotional service should give up his prescribed duties. No one should be lazy under the plea of devotional service. One has to execute devotional service according to his prescribed duties. Svakarma krit means that one should discharge the duties prescribed for him without neglect. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Now the verse again. Performing his prescribed duties, one should worship the deity of the Supreme Personality of Godhead until one realizes my presence in his own heart and in the hearts of other living entities as well. Now, so we're hearing today about prescribed duties. Yes, we all have our different prescribed duties according to our varna and our ashram. And they should be performed properly, dutifully. And we perform our duties dutifully. And yet, simply performing our prescribed duties is not enough. It is described in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam that it's simply a waste of time. Yes, if we don't develop our attraction for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then even performing prescribed duties perfectly, that does not fulfill the self, and it does not fulfill our aim of life. And the sages at Naimisharanya, they're concerned about this, and they ask their first question to Srila Sutta Goswami is, can you please summarize all the revealed scriptures so that we can understand what is the most essential part of all the scriptures, so that the people of this age can be saved, yes, can take it up, they can be happy. How can people be properly situated? And the answer to that is given in the second chapter of the first canto, Savaya Pum Samparo Dharmo, Yato Bhakti Radhokshaje, Ahai Tuki Apratihata Yayatma Suprasidati, that the supreme occupation, dharma, the supreme dharma for all of humanity is that by which men can attain to loving devotional service to the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport there, he says that the sages, they're concerned about this. They want to know how people can take up the most essential part of the scripture. What is the most essential part of the scripture? That we have to come to this point of devotional service. Otherwise, simply performing our prescribed duties is not enough. It won't satisfy the self. Ahaitukya pratihata. Even performing devotional service in a motivated fashion, it's not going to completely satisfy the self. It has to come to this point of being unmotivated, uninterrupted. Then we'll feel the satisfaction. So, following on from that verse, the 8th verse of the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto, it states that the occupational duties a man performs according to his own position are only so much useless labour if they do not provoke attraction to the message of the personality of Godhead. That actually prescribed duties simply on their own, without this, without being coated in devotional service, without getting to this point of realizing our relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and our relationship with all other living entities, then it's useless labor. As Prabhupada also says today in the purport, it is understood that he's simply laboring without profit. So there's not the real profit, there's not the real gain from laboring in that way. Simply doing our prescribed duties. I mean, in today's day and age, even just performing your prescribed duties is like such a challenge for so many people, you know. So simply just performing duties, we may think, wow, is actually performing their duties properly, that's great. And it's definitely it can be a real achievement just to be able to perform your prescribed ashram duties. And yet, if we're performing our prescribed duties, even if we perform them perfectly, if we're not simultaneously developing our attraction for hearing about Krishna, developing our relationship with Krishna and our relationship with all other living entities, as is being pointed out in these verses, it's not simply me and Krishna, we need to understand our relationship with all other living entities. And that comes from real realization of our relationship with Krishna. We'll be able to understand that. Sorry, I'm really tired after yesterday. I'm sure everybody's really tired after yesterday, so it's probably not going to be as I would like it to be. Sorry for that. In the purport to this verse in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto, Srila Prabhupada, he talks about concentrated and extended selfishness. Yes, that we have this selfishness kind of inherent, and it is generally our concentrated selfishness is our concern simply for our own personal body, and then extended selfishness goes out to family, society, in that way. And yet this does not satisfy the self. And in order to extend ourselves further, in today's verse is describing we should worship the deity. We should worship the deity of the Lord so that we are not remaining in this selfish consciousness of just me, my own personal body, and my extended family or society. No, our vision should always be fixed on Krishna. And being engaged in worshipping the deity is a very potent way to fix our consciousness on Krishna, especially as we're worshipping the deity according to rules and regulations. We must show up. We must do the offerings. We must do the artis. We must do the dressing. We must try to perform this in a consciousness that we're trying to please the Lord. Then automatically our focus comes away from just me and mine, and our focus is actually there for the deity. It's there for Krishna. And when we perform deity worship according to the rules and regulations, with this mood that we're trying to serve, we're trying to please. My dear Lord, let me please you. I know I'm going to turn up on time, I'm going to put the right amount of things on the plates, but I want to do that in a way that is pleasing to you. Because as we know, Krishna is accepting our intention. There's so many do's and don'ts in the process of deity worship, and that helps to purify our heart. But the real purifying potency is there when we're trying to do it in a way that's pleasing to Krishna, in a way that we're developing our relationship with the deity. And then in that way, our heart becomes purified. As Srila Prabhupada in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he quotes there from Srila Jiva Goswami about the importance of deity worship and how deity worship is so essential, especially in this time when we're very contaminated, because deity worship purifies our heart and our mind. And as Prabhupada points out, it gets us out of this selfishness of just me and my extended selfishness, extended bodies or society. And instead it helps us focus on serving the Supreme Lord. And then the purification that comes from that is very reciprocal, and anyone who's engaged in deity worship knows that in ways the Lord reciprocates with you when you're trying to serve Him nicely, performing the rules and regulations of deity worship. And then what happens, as Lord Kapila is explaining, is that we can realize the presence of the Supreme Lord in our own heart and in the hearts of all other living entities. Because our vision becomes purified. We're no longer just seeing my body, my extended bodies, or my society, no, our vision is on the Supreme Lord while we're performing our duties very well. And this is the next point that Srila Prabhupada brings up. Svakarma Krit is one who's engaged in performing their prescribed duties. And Prabhupada says no one should be lazy under the plea of devotional service. Yes, that our prescribed duties are meant to be performed without neglect. So there are different types of prescribed duties. And Srila Prabhupada talks about the duties according to our varna and ashram. And we know there are different duties in the different ashrams, different duties for the different varnas as given in Bhagavad Gita. Our ashram duties should be performed without neglect. And then there are duties prescribed by the spiritual master, our spiritual duties. Yes, and they should also be performed without neglect. They should be performed very enthusiastically. And this is proper for one who is engaged in devotional service. As we are all so familiar with Arjuna's situation in Bhagavad Gita, he wanted to give up his prescribed duty. His prescribed duty was to fight. He said, no, I don't want to fight. And Krishna explained in so many ways why he cannot give up his prescribed duty. His duty was that of a Kshatriya, and he couldn't give that up. You can't give up work born of your own nature, Krishna explains. And instead, Krishna encouraged Arjuna to perform his prescribed duties in a spirit of devotion, and in that way attain the perfection of life, engaging our prescribed duties in Krishna's service. So our prescribed duties, our work, our family, they should all be engaged in Krishna's service. And then that is the perfection. That's the perfection of prescribed duties, is when we perform them in relationship with Krishna. Because then that brings us out of our selfishness. It allows us to extend ourselves, and then anything that's performed in relationship with Krishna purifies our heart. Yes? And in that way, the heart becomes purified, and we're able to better understand Krishna. We're able to better perceive Krishna. We're able to better understand how Krishna resides in every body, in all living entities. This is the result of performing devotional service under the guidance of the spiritual master. This from Bhagavad Gita. after this verse, Tadvidi Pranipatena, approach the spiritual master and receive knowledge from him. And then the following verse, it says that when you do that, then you will understand that all living entities are mine, and you will never fall into such illusion of seeing things separate from me. So this is what happens when we perform devotional service in the proper way, under the guidance of the spiritual master, performing our duties, our so-called material duties and spiritual duties. They should be performed very properly, without neglect, Prabhupada says. We shouldn't be lazy. Not that, I don't think my family duties or my work duties or this is important, I'm just going to flag it off, and it's not like that. Devotees don't perform their duties like that. Devotees perform duties very enthusiastically, very properly, very intelligently. Krishna gives that intelligence. When we're engaged in activities that pull our focus to Krishna, which is there in the process of deity worship. That, in our homes, in the temple, we're so fortunate, we're able to focus our attention on the Supreme Lord in their beautiful deity forms. And in that way we attain so much inspiration, so much encouragement to keep performing our prescribed duties, to keep performing our spiritual duties. And then we'll get to this point, of realizing the Lord's presence in our heart and realizing the Lord's presence in everyone else's heart. I'm going to leave it there and apologize for my tired class. But if someone would like to make any further comments or share their realizations, please do.
It's such a scientific thing, this whole deity worship, like you say, rules and regulations, but the way it affects our consciousness over periods of time. If we approach it in the right mood, if we're approaching it in the mood of like Trinadapi, then you get direct reciprocation from the deity, and then if you're able to see, like it's mentioned here, the equality amongst all of us, then it becomes very satisfying. And Krishna, there's a couple of verses coming up. Whereas if we don't have this mentality and we discriminate between everybody, then we still have this bias, this fear, because we're still on such a bodily concept of life. So it's such a wonderful process of lifting us off this bodily platform completely, if we're willing to embrace it like that. So the benefit we receive for our own spiritual realizations and the pleasure of Krishna ultimately, it's inconceivable really when you really dive into it. It's like we hear it being like an ocean of mercy. So it can be like that if we're willing to do these things properly without envy and anger and discrimination. It's almost like you can enter within the spiritual world if you can, like we hear of the very advanced devotees who see Krishna everywhere. So it's gradually bringing us to that point where we can be fully satisfied being in these bodies, just being able to do this devotional service.
Yes, yeah, it's a very nice point. Yeah, I remember many years ago going to a deity worship seminar given by Nisringa Kavacha Prabhu, the head of deity worship, and he was explaining how deity worship is like, specifically for deity worship, but we can see this as applicable in all ways in devotional service. It's like like an iceberg under the water. You can see the tip, yeah, and we see the execution. And yet what's the most important, what is the real foundation, what is Krishna really looking at, is what's underneath the water. Yeah? It's that our intention, our motivation when we're performing our service. specifically with deity worship, but applicable for everything, that, as you said, we're trying to perform it in a way that's pleasing to Krishna without envy, without, we're actually wanting the purification. We're not just simply ticking the box and, oh, yep, okay, arti finished, I washed the paraphernalia, I put it away, but we're actually doing it in the proper mood, and that's what propels everything forward, And yet what we can see is the tip, We might see, but what's important is what's underneath. Yes,
I think it's interesting you use the word intention, because, of course, that's two words, in and intention. And there's a big tension with the deities in that they're too attractive. They just take your mind. The more time you spend here, the more you just want to do stuff for them. Jagannath wants like 50 preparations. They're greedy, and they've got an infinite greed and an infinite amount of attraction. So there's a tension we have. Prabhupada's pointing out, no, you still have to do your duties. The whole Bhagavad Gita is, you still have to do your duty. Doesn't matter how attracted I am. And you can't just go meditate on me in the forest. So there's a real tension. And then, of course, in means to bring it in. So it's like bringing that tension within yourself, where you have to resolve it with your intelligence. Krishna says in the meditation, that I give the intelligence by which you can come to me. You can resolve this tension. And your intention is to bring the real tension called the deities too attractive inside. Because we get too ecstatic. It's too much ecstasy for you, Prabhu. I'll just encourage you.
That's really nice.
The tension that we have within, unfortunately, Krishna's there in the super soul within also. And so it all works out.
Yeah, that's a really nice point. You can see it works out in the lives of the great devotees, who come before us. You can see, like, as you described, we can see in Prabhupada, he was able to, when you read about Srila Prabhupada and with his early disciples, they all say, like, how Prabhupada just was able to get down on their level, he was able to, they knew he was so exalted, but he acted as if he was practicing devotional service rather than being the epitome of devotional service. So although this, like, all that you described is continuously occurring, so much attraction, and yet he was able to perform his, he was able to act in a way that people were still able to relate with him, understand him, and Krishna, as you say, gives the intelligence. All of the very exalted devotees who are on the topmost level of devotional service, but they're able, Krishna helps, Krishna gives us the intelligence by which we can still perform. I don't know if I'm explaining myself properly, you know what I mean? Yes. So.
It reminds me of that story of Prabhupada from the Los Angeles temple when he first got it. Somebody gave him or whatever they got given that old church in Lysaka Boulevard in Los Angeles. And Prabhupada was there personally. He was trying to develop himself personally. And when he wanted to stop traveling for a while to develop that temple. And then he had a dream. Jagannath was saying, come to India. So Jagannath came over with a dream and said, I want you to come to India. Jagannath was greedy for Prabhupada's presence and whatever. I think in Vrindavan. And that's how they got the Krishna Bhava temple. Because Jagannath wanted to come to India, and he was arguing in his dream saying, I don't want to go to India, I have this temple, I'm developing it. I'm supposed to come here to the West. And Jagannath convinced him, because there's this tension, like a battle. And Jagannath says, I'll give you a better temple. And so Prabhupada was like, really? Okay, all right. Better temple and I'll come. And that's how they got the Krishna Bhava temple. Which you probably didn't do that. Tension's like a battle.
Yes, but it's so desirable. Yes, that's the battle we all want to be engaged in. Yeah, having Krishna and that reciprocation. Yeah. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Ram Prabhu ki